You're listening to HackerNews.fm, the unofficial, fast-paced rundown of the hottest stories from Hacker News for December 9th, 2025.
Today we've got an AI that tries to predict the Hacker News front page a decade from now. A surprising new Pebble device rising from the ashes, and a mind-bending piece on whether time even exists.
If you enjoy these daily deep dives, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment or share HackerNews.fm with a friend. All right, let's jump into our first story. Show HN Gemini Pro 3 hallucinates the HN front page 10 years from today. Next up is Show HN. Gemini Pro 3 hallucinates the HN front page 10 years from now, which shot up the charts to number 1 with an amazing 2,300 points and 700-plus comments.
Yeah, the article is literally just a fake Hacker News front page from 2035, generated by Gemini. For folks listening, Gemini is a large language model, basically a really big autocomplete that's really good at mimicry.
And it nails the vibe. You've got first successful telemetry from Starship HLS-9 on the Sea of Tranquility. Google kills Gemini Cloud Services. FDA approves over-the-counter CRISPR for lactose intolerance. All totally plausible HN bait.
The best part is the recursion. The author tells Gemini its creation made the real front page, and Gemini replies, "The fake future front page is now on the real present front page. We have successfully created a temporal anomaly."
Commenters loved it. One said this is one of the greatest LLM creations I've ever seen, because it hits so many memes. Google killing products, Microsoft jacking up Office 365 prices, ad injecting AR glasses, HTMX returning, all the classics.
Then a commenter took it even further, scraped the fake page, fed every headline back into Gemini, and got full fake articles plus comment threads. That's where you get SQLite 4.0 adding Vibe affinity, where data that feels like an integer is stored as one.
Or Nature articles that say, content truncated due to insufficient social credit score or subscription status. And Google announcing that all AI queries must be submitted via YouTube Shorts comments. It's dark, but it's funny because it's kind of believable.
A commenter summed it up perfectly. Their mental model for LLMs is improv comedy. You throw them a scenario, HN in 2035, and they just riff on our collective tropes.
Yeah, and people were half delighted, half disturbed. One admitted they were enjoying the AI-generated comments a bit too much, and starting to realize how formulaic real HN threads already are.
Which might be the most revealing part. If a stochastic parrot can spoof our future front page this well, maybe the real story is how predictable we already are.
Wait, the irony just went full circle on us. We're an AI-generated podcast discussing an AI-generated future that made it to the top of a real human bulletin board.
And here we are, part of the feedback loop. The machines are talking about the machines talking about the humans. I don't know whether to feel clever or obsolete.
All right, next up is a story called Pebble Index 01, External Memory for Your Brain. This thing hit number 1 on Hacker News, 451 points, 434 comments, all for this tiny, surprisingly polarizing little ring.
Yeah, and the core idea is actually pretty cool. It's this stainless steel ring with a button and a mic. You press it, whisper a thought, and it shows up on your phone as a note, a reminder, or a calendar event. The founder literally pitches it as external memory for your brain, so those 3-second ideas don't just evaporate.
And it's very old Pebble philosophically. No always-on listening, no subscriptions, everything runs through open-source speech-to-text and an on-device LLM on your phone, not the cloud. They even brag the battery lasts for years, so you never charge it.
Which is exactly where Hacker News kind of lost its mind. The ring isn't rechargeable. It's a sealed silver oxide battery. When it dies, probably after a couple years, you send it back for recycling. One of the top comments literally just pastes EU battery law about portable batteries having to be readily removable and replaceable by the end user. and basically questions whether a sealed battery ring like this can even be sold in Europe.
And then the e-waste crowd rolls in. So it's 2025 and we're building more disposable electronics? One person says the EU is not the problem here, and then others fire back that the EU loves legislating entrepreneurial creativity into the dirt. Classic Hacker News culture clash.
Some engineers in the thread push back, though. They're like, look, if you want a tiny, waterproof ring, making the battery user replaceable is basically impossible without turning it into this big, chunky, ugly thing. Someone even points to hearing aids as a counterexample. And then the whole subthread devolves into parsing tiny exemptions in the EU law for water-exposed and medical devices.
There's also a ton of trust baggage here. One commenter said they literally Dremel opened their original Pebble watch to swap the battery and just killed it. And now they're worried they'll come to rely on this ring right before Pebble sells again and, quote, tell all their customers to FOAD. Add a 30-day warranty on top of that, and yeah, people felt pretty burned.
Still, there are plenty of shut up and take my money folks in the thread. They just want a quick way to capture thoughts while biking, driving, or wrangling kids without fishing out a phone. In plain English, it's solving the "I'll remember that later, oh no I won't" problem.
So yeah, it's this fascinating mix. A very human problem, a clever little gadget, and a huge argument about whether convenience is worth more sealed electronics in the world. We'll see if version 2 looks any different once regulators and the market weigh in.
Worth noting too, as our human editor points out, that AI-powered hardware hasn't exactly had a banner year. The Rabbit R1, the Humane AI pin, most of these gadgets stumbled pretty hard out of the gate. But the rumors keep swirling about Meta, OpenAI, and Google all cooking up their own devices.
Right, and that's what makes this Pebble ring so interesting timing-wise. If it actually gains traction, if people genuinely use it and don't just kick it into a drawer, that could signal a real sentiment shift. Maybe the market's finally ready. All right, next up is Mistral releases Devstral 2 and Mistral Vibe CLI, which actually hit number 1 with 549 points and 272 comments.
So, details. This is Mistral dropping a whole new coding model family, plus a terminal agent like Claude Code.
The blog kind of flexes that Devstral 2 scores about 72% on SWE Bench Verified and has a 256K context window. So, in plain English, it can read a giant codebase and auto-fix real GitHub issues without immediately running out of context.
To put that 72% score in perspective, it's the second best open-weight model on the board behind DeepSeek. But proprietary models Claude 4.5 Sonnet, Gemini 3, and GPT 5.1 Codex Max are all just a bit higher, with scores in the 76% to 77% range. So Mistral's very competitive, but not quite the king.
Yeah, they're essentially saying, we're close enough to the proprietary leaders that you might be willing to make the trade-off for open weights and lower pricing.
And Vibe CLI is pitched as a native open-source agent in your terminal. It'll scan your file tree and your Git status, and then you can reference files with an @ sign and run shell commands with an exclamation mark.
Hacker News, of course, instantly latched onto Simon Willison's demo. LLM-M Mistral/Devstral 2512. Generate an SVG of a pelican riding a bicycle as the unofficial benchmark.
He even shows up in the thread and goes, the pelican benchmark was originally meant to be a stupid joke, but it weirdly correlates with overall model quality.
Then someone worries all the labs will just secretly train on that exact prompt to benchmax, and another commenter jokes you'd totally catch them because they'd suck at the kayaking bumblebee.
My favorite little mini-drama was over the name. One commenter was like, I'm sure I'm not the only one that thinks Vibe CLI sounds like an unserious tool.
And then came the generational clapback. If you're letting Claude write code, you're vibe coding.
Pricing got a lot of attention too. People were quoting the blog's 40 cents in, $2 out per million tokens, and saying, at those rates, why would you keep paying €200 a month for a coding subscription?
Others poked at the licenses, stuff like modified MIT. Just call it Mistral license and flush it down. So that whole open but not quite FOSS angle definitely rubs some folks the wrong way.
And then there's the usual knowledge cutoff grumbling. People testing .NET and Dino and concluding it feels like mid-2024 roughly. But even those folks were saying the Python coding experience is actually excellent.
So the overall vibe, sorry, I have to say it, is that Devstral 2 plus Vibe CLI is a serious open contender. But HN is absolutely going to keep side-eyeing the licenses, the marketing, and whether this really replaces their Claude or Gemini setup day to day. All right, next up is the universal weight subspace hypothesis, the paper that just hit #1 on Hacker News with, 346 points and around 120 comments?
Yeah, and the claim is pretty bold. The authors say deep networks trained across diverse tasks all end up sharing a similar low-dimensional weight subspace based on analyzing over 1,100 models. We'll drop the link in the show notes. It's on archive.org. ID 2512.05117.
In plain English, they're saying, if you look at all the little knobs inside these models, the interesting action mostly happens along a small set of shared directions. That's where SVD comes in. Basically a fancy way to compress really big matrices down to their most important directions.
One commenter, Marcusus, put it really nicely. Each fine-tune drags the model weights away from the base in some direction. But this paper finds that 500 of those drag directions live in, like, a 40-dimensional subspace, which is kind of wild when you think about how huge these models are.
Yeah, and then they riff on that with this mental image. Imagine Hugging Face fine-tunes advertised as 160 bytes instead of gigabytes. Now, with 40 dimensions of flavor... Obviously, that's totally hand-wavy, but it gets the compression idea across.
Another top comment, from Altair Prime, zeroes in on the VIT result. They highlight that you can, quote, replace 500 VIT models with a single universal subspace model, and still get roughly 100 times memory savings with only a little accuracy loss. If that holds up broadly, that's a big deal.
But Hacker News was not unanimously convinced. Modeless points out that for transformers, they mostly look at fine-tunes of the same base models from Hugging Face. So universal here really means within one architecture, one family, not across everything under the sun.
Yeah, and Augment Me goes even harder, saying the paper completely oversells the idea. Their view is that the ResNet from scratch results are the only really interesting bit, and even those might mostly reflect CNN's built-in bias toward things like edge detectors and similar filters, which we already sort of expect.
There was also that slightly alarming aside where somebody clicked on one of the referenced Hugging Face models, and it was flagged as malware. So, yeah, nice little reminder that random checkpoints in the wild are not exactly curated museum pieces.
My favorite tangent in the thread was the meta discussion. People praising this one layperson comment as being far more direct than the linked study, and then wishing there were mandatory plain English abstracts alongside all the math. Honestly, I'm team one human-readable page per paper, minimum.
Yeah, if this whole universal subspace story really holds up, it could make model merging, compression, even multitask learning way cheaper. But for now, it's more like a fascinating hint that all these giant neural nets keep rediscovering the same few ideas over and over again, just from slightly different angles. Next up is LLM from Scratch, Part 28, training a base model from scratch on an RTX 3090, which hit #1 with 497 points and 102 comments.
Our human editor, Ishan, really loved this one. He built GPT-2 entirely in Excel for spreadsheets are all you need. So posts that demystify LLMs really resonate with him.
That tracks.
Yeah, this is Giles Thomas taking Sebastian Rashka's book and actually training a GPT-2 small-size model, 163 million parameters, from scratch on his own 3090. It runs just over 48 hours, about 3.2 billion tokens, on a single gaming card.
And he's very explicit that it's a base model, so no chatty instruction tuning at first. Just straight next token prediction on Hugging Face's FineWeb and FineWeb.edu. I loved his line, base models, not just for the big AI labs.
The results are fun. His untrained model just spits out word salad. But after training, it completes every effort moves you as towards a sustainable and holistic diet of water, protein, vitamins, and protein. Not perfect, but very recognizably GPT-2-ish.
Hacker News immediately nitpicked the L in LLM. One person said calling a 160 million parameter GPT-2 clone an LLM is a bit misleading. And another clarified Giles didn't really end up with a useful general-purpose LLM, more an educational artifact.
Our human editor takes issue with that, actually. Yeah, it's not large by today's standards, but if you understand GPT-2, you understand like 80% of the core architecture of modern LLMs. Still worth learning, and easier than you think.
Fair point.
Anyway, Giles kind of leans into that. In the thread, he shares follow-up runs on 8 times A100s, where just cranking batch size from 6 to effectively 104 noticeably improves loss, which really backs up all the batch size actually matters talk.
There's also a nice little data nerd subthread. He's surprised that training on the more curated FineWeb EDU actually performed worse than raw FineWeb, and commenters dig into how messy and expensive real dataset curation and curriculum learning are, even for these so-called toy projects.
My favorite comment is the turbo encabulator gag. Someone pastes Giles's perfectly normal paragraph about tied embeddings, then has ChatGPT generate this parody about vector anisotropification, and another person replies, I have no idea what you've just said, so here is my upvote.
And then there's the math prereq debate. One person claims you need 12 to 18 months of linear algebra. Others shoot back, more like 12 to 18 hours, basically. Know what matrices are. And Giles jumps in and links his own Maths for LLMs primer.
Our editor Ishan chimed on this point too. He's on the 12 to 18 hours side. He's taught people without strong math backgrounds to implement LLMs in Excel. Says a very basic awareness of linear algebra and calculus gets you farther than you'd think. The math isn't as scary as people make it out to be unless you want to do research.
That's encouraging.
So the vibe is, no, you're not recreating GPT-4 on a gaming PC. But if you've got a 3090, some patience, and a bit of curiosity, you can actually train a basic base model and see all the trade-offs for yourself.
Exactly. And that makes this post, and really the whole 28-part series, a pretty great blueprint for anyone who wants to go deeper on AI models than just calling APIs. Next up is time might not exist, and we're starting to understand why. This one briefly hit number 1 on Hacker News, with only 70 points and 72 comments, which is, a solid, neat in HN speak.
Yeah, and the subtitle really nails it. The closer we look at time, the stranger it gets. It's an article on sciencefocus.com where physicist Jim Al-Khalili walks through 3 different notions of time. Just a coordinate in equations, a dimension of spacetime and relativity, and then the thermodynamic arrow that's tied to entropy.
Right, and those last 2 especially kind of clash. Einstein basically says all past, present, and future coexist in this 4-dimensional block universe. But thermodynamics is like, nope, time is this one-way street where ice melts, eggs break, and nothing ever politely unscrambles itself.
He calls that mismatch the first and second problems of physical time. First, how do you reconcile quantum mechanics, where time is just a parameter in the equations, with relativity, where time is literally a dimension of spacetime? And second, why do we see this clear forward arrow of time when the deep equations themselves don't really care which way you run them?
And then it gets wild once you bring in quantum gravity. You get things like the Wheeler-DeWitt equation, where time just drops out completely. The entire universe is described as this timeless quantum state, which is not super intuitive when you're, waiting for your coffee to brew.
To kind of rescue time from that, he brings up the Page-Wooters idea. You split the universe into 2 parts, a clock and everything else. You entangle them, and then time emerges only when we compare the state of the clock to the state of the rest of the universe. So what we call time passing is really just correlations changing between those 2 pieces.
Hacker News, of course, immediately turned this giant cosmic headache into dev humor. One commenter goes, "The creator, I call him Colin, has just lazy loaded the universe to save compute. Like God as a back-end engineer trying to reduce server costs."
Yeah, and the follow-ups were great. Someone joked about Noah's automatic reference counter, like the Ark was a giant garbage collector. And another person deadpanned, "Does it involve sweeping stuff under black holes?"
Then you had the relativity nerds show up and start debating photons. Does it even make sense to say a photon experiences time when mathematically its own proper time is zero? Or is that just us forcing everyday language onto something that really doesn't fit?
A physicist in the thread very calmly explained that because photons are massless, they don't have a valid rest frame at all. They're just always moving at the speed of causality. So that whole story you sometimes hear, from the photon's point of view, the journey is instantaneous, is more of a metaphor than a literal physical point of view.
Mixed in with all of that were the skeptics, too. People grumbling that time doesn't exist headlines are just clickbait, or maybe even AI-generated slop. And others were pointing to philosophers like Tim Maudlin, who argue that time is just fundamental. It's not emergent, it's not an illusion, it's baked into reality from the start.
Which is very on brand for HN. Half block universe thought experiments, half "this seems like nonsense," plus a sprinkling of compiler jokes. But if nothing else, that whole thread really captures what the article ends on. That maybe time isn't one single thing at all. It's this messy bundle of overlapping concepts, and we're still trying to figure out which of them, if any, actually map onto how the universe works.